Will Smith is significantly bigger than me. We are not the same size. Never gonna happen. No. I took that hit like Pacquiao.
By Will Smith. Chris got slapped in the face. When it happened, I thought it was fake.
The night Will Smith smacked Chris Rock at the Oscars shook the whole world. But what came after flipped the comedy game upside down. From wild stand-up specials to shocking on-stage attacks, Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle pulled back the curtain on a Hollywood no one was ready to see. What did they really expose about Will, and how could it crush what's left of his rep? This was a Hollywood explosion nobody saw coming. Chris Rock came back swinging with a brutal 10-minute takedown that had everyone talking. On March 4th, 2023, Netflix dropped its very first live comedy special, Selective Outrage, with Chris Rock lighting up the stage at Baltimore's legendary Hippodrome Theater. The event was hyped like the comedy Super Bowl, with a full-on pre-show and after-show hosted by Ronnie Chieng, David Spade, and Dana Carvey. Big stars like Arsenio Hall and Leslie Jones even pulled up. The energy was insane. Chris hit the stage clean, rocking all white with a flashy Prince necklace, and before getting started, he made one thing clear. He was going to try not to offend anybody, because nowadays, you never know who's going to get triggered.
To social media on Friday, 4 months after he took the Oscar stage and smacked Rock across the face.
For a full hour, Chris tore through topics like woke culture, selective outrage, the Kardashians, and Meghan Markle, and he did it all with that razor-sharp edge that only he could pull off. Chris dove deep into real-life issues, tearing into social topics with his raw honesty. He broke down selective outrage like never before, calling it out as people picking and choosing who gets canceled and who doesn't. He joked that folks still blast Michael Jackson's music, but won't touch R. Kelly's, saying it's only because one of them just got better songs. That punchline hit hard because both were accused of the same kind of stuff. Then, when there were only 10 minutes left, the crowd felt it. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Chris finally turned the spotlight on the slap heard around the world. He spoke about that painful night, admitting he got smacked by a man he had always respected. He kept quiet for months while everyone kept asking the same question. Did it hurt?
I promise we'll be able to be friends again.
I don't care. I don't care. I thought I was gonna die. It was a weird...
Chris finally broke his silence, saying the slap still hurts, joking that he's got Summertime still ringing in his ears. That jab stung because he used Will's own hit song to roast him, flipping Smith's biggest musical moment into a brutal reminder of that night. Chris didn't stop there. He pointed out the clear size difference between them, reminding everyone that Will Smith is way bigger and stronger than him. He painted the perfect picture, a total mismatch, crushing the idea that he should have swung back or that it was ever a fair fight. Then came the knockout line. Chris laughed and said Will once played Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world, while he played Pookie in New Jack City and even a piece of corn in Pootie Tang. The crowd went wild. It was hilarious and savage all at once. Chris's self-deprecating humor hit perfectly. He wasn't playing the victim, he was just keeping it real while holding his head high and making everyone laugh at the truth. Then he dropped the real bomb, his main point about Will Smith's selective outrage. Chris laid it out plain and simple. Everybody knows what went down, and everyone who really knows the story understands he had nothing to do with it. Because, as he put it, he didn't have any entanglements. That word alone, entanglements, blew the crowd up. He was calling back to that viral Red Table Talk episode where Jada Pinkett Smith openly talked about her relationship with singer August Alsina, her son's friend. Chris said straight up that he usually wouldn't speak on something that personal, but since they were the ones who aired it out on the internet, it was fair game. That's when Chris's whole strategy became clear. He was flipping the script. He told the audience that Jada had hurt Will way worse than Will ever hurt him. The world had already seen the headlines, heard the jokes, and called Will all kinds of names while labeling Jada a predator. But instead of confronting any of that, who did Will hit? Chris said, "He hit me," someone he knew he could beat. Then he called that out as straight-up weak behavior. The breakdown was brutal but sharp. Chris argued that Will's outburst wasn't some noble act of defending Jada's honor at all. It was all about bottled-up anger and humiliation. Will couldn't swing at August Alsina, and he couldn't punch the internet trolls clowning him every day. So instead, he took all that rage and smacked Chris Rock in front of the whole world. Chris pointed out that Will didn't just hit him. He hit a smaller man he knew wouldn't swing back, especially at a fancy event being broadcast to millions. It wasn't just a slap. It was a performance of fake toughness for the cameras. Then Chris circled back to an older beef, the 2016 Oscars drama that had already caused serious tension with the Smiths. He reminded everyone that years ago, Jada Pinkett Smith told him he shouldn't host the Oscars because her husband didn't get nominated for concussion. Chris laid it out with precision. Jada had kicked off the conflict by demanding he quit his job, then acted all offended when he made light jokes about it. He clapped back hard, saying no one was picking on her. She started the whole mess by telling a grown man to give up his gig because her husband didn't get an award nomination. Then came the knockout punchline, Chris joked, and then this person gives me an actual concussion. That clever wordplay flipped Will's movie Concussion into a savage joke about the slap itself. It was classic Chris Rock, flipping pain into perfectly timed comedy. After that, Chris changed his tone, getting real for a moment. He admitted that he had loved Will Smith for most of his life. He said he'd seen him open for Run DMC back in the day and had always rooted for him, until now. Then he dropped a brutal line saying he watches Emancipation just to see Will Smith get punished, laughing that it made him root for the wrong side. That joke hit with a mix of shock and laughter, dark, edgy, and painfully funny. Chris used it to show how deep the betrayal cut, turning Will's once heroic image into something completely flipped on its head. Chris twisted the meaning of emancipation into something jaw-dropping, joking about whipping Will Smith's character, flipping the movie's message of strength and survival into a darkly funny punch about someone getting what they deserved. It was shocking, bold, and somehow hilarious all at once. The joke worked because Chris went all in. His delivery was so confident that people couldn't help but laugh, even though the image was wild. Then he closed the night with the question everyone had been dying to hear him answer for a whole year. Why didn't he hit Will Smith back? Chris said it plain. I got parents. I was raised right. He explained that his folks taught him never to fight in front of white people. That line crushed the audience, not just because it was funny, but because it hit deep. It showed that his choice to stay calm came from something powerful, dignity, restraint, and old-school wisdom passed down through generations. He wasn't scared, he was smart. Chris grew up knowing how the world sees black men, how quick people are to twist a moment of anger into a stereotype. His refusal to swing back wasn't weakness, it was strength wrapped in self-control. By the end, it was clear that Chris's special wasn't just about the slap, it was a full-on breakdown of Will Smith's life, marriage, and mindset. He exposed what he saw as the truth behind that Oscar moment. Will hit him because Chris was the safe one to hit, because the cameras were rolling, and Will needed to prove something, because deep down he was trying to reclaim the manhood that got shattered when Jada's affair went public.
Fans of Dave Chappelle will want to flock to Netflix Tuesday to see his new comedy specials.
It was never about the G.I. Jane joke. It was about years of bottled up pain, pride, and humiliation exploding in one moment on live TV. Chris Rock didn't just clap back. He rewrote the whole story with a mic drop that Hollywood will never forget. According to people close to Will Smith, he didn't even sit down to watch Chris Rock's special, but he definitely heard all about it. Sources say Will had folks fill him in on everything Chris said, and the word is he's feeling straight up embarrassed and hurt. The jokes hit too close to home, and now clips from the special are everywhere, on social media, in headlines, and all over the internet. Apparently, Will feels like he's done enough to apologize and move on, but Chris just won't let it go. He reportedly thinks it's time for everyone to move forward, not keep dragging the same wound into the spotlight. Still, Will's said to be extra upset that Netflix even gave Chris that kind of stage, and he feels like the way Chris went in on Jada crossed a serious line. But Chris wasn't holding back for anyone. His brutal takedown was his version of closure, one man's way of clapping back after getting humiliated in front of millions. Before the special even dropped, though, that one slap had already shaken the whole entertainment world. It didn't just end with Chris, it sparked chaos that would later spill over into Dave Chappelle's own onstage attack. The slap heard round the world changed everything. It all went down during the 94th Academy Awards at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood. Chris Rock was on stage, cool as ever in a sharp blue velvet tux, about to present the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, completely unaware he was about to be part of the most watched live assault in TV history. Chris's connection to the Smiths actually stretched back years. In 2016, he hosted the Oscars during the explosive Oscars So White controversy. That was the same year Jada Pinkett Smith led a boycott over Hollywood's lack of diversity. And when Will got snubbed for his role in Concussion, Jada had gone public saying she wouldn't attend the ceremony, setting the stage for years of simmering tension that finally exploded that fateful night. Back in 2016, Chris had already taken a playful jab that would end up haunting him years later. During his Oscar monologue, he cracked a joke that Jada boycotting the Oscars was like him boycotting Rihanna's panties because he wasn't invited. The audience burst into laughter, but behind those laughs, he had unknowingly planted a seed of resentment that would simmer for 6 long years. Fast forward to 2022, the night everything changed. Chris looked out over the glittering Oscar crowd, ready to drop what he would later call the nicest joke I ever told. Spotting Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head caused by alopecia, an autoimmune condition that leads to hair loss, he joked, "Can't wait to see you in G.I. Jane 2." It was a quick, edgy nod to Demi Moore's 1997 role as the bald, tough-as-nails soldier. The crowd chuckled politely, but the camera told another story. Jada rolled her eyes, looking annoyed and clearly over it, though not surprised. She'd been roasted by comedians before, but this time the energy felt off. At first, Will Smith laughed along with the crowd, smiling, relaxed, totally unbothered. But then something shifted. Maybe it was Jada's reaction, maybe it was everything building up over the years. Whatever it was, his expression changed fast. In a move that no one saw coming, Will Smith stood up, straightened his jacket, and calmly walked toward the stage. Chris stood there, still holding the mic, assuming it was just a bit, until smack. Will swung with an open hand, connecting across Chris's face with a sharp crack that echoed through the Dolby Theater's sound system.
The local man accused of attacking Dave Chappelle on stage says he was triggered by the comedian's joke.
Chris stumbled slightly, his face frozen in shock. The audience gasped, unsure if it was real or a setup. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Was that scripted? Was it a joke? But the truth hit seconds later when Will, now back in his seat, shouted from the front row, twice, louder each time, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." The room went dead silent. It was the slap that stopped the world, and the moment that would change both men's lives forever. The uncensored profanity that blared across international broadcasts made it crystal clear this wasn't some rehearsed skit or award show stunt. This was real anger, real violence, unfolding live at Hollywood's biggest night. Chris Rock, still stunned and trying to process what just happened, did what comedians do best. He tried to keep the show moving. With the entire world watching, he muttered, "That was the greatest night in the history of television," forcing out a laugh to mask the shock. Humor was the only weapon he had left in that moment, a tiny shield against the chaos that had just erupted. The audience sat frozen. No laughter, no applause, just disbelief. No one knew what to do. Should they clap? Should someone step in? Security didn't move, the Academy didn't react, and somehow Will Smith was allowed to just sit back down like nothing happened. The show rolled on as if one of the world's biggest movie stars hadn't just slapped a man on live TV. Less than 40 minutes later, unbelievably, Will Smith was back on stage, this time holding the Oscar for Best Actor for his role as Richard Williams in King Richard. The crowd erupted into cheers and history was made. He became only the 5th black man ever to win that award. But the moment felt surreal, even uncomfortable. Will's acceptance speech was emotional and confusing all at once. He cried, he apologized to the Academy, but not to Chris, and started talking about love, protection, and being called by God to do great things. He compared himself to Richard Williams, describing him as a man fiercely devoted to his family. But for many watching, it was jarring. And minutes earlier, that same devotion had turned violent. Yet, the audience rose to their feet, giving him a standing ovation, cheering for the same man who had just hit someone live on stage. It was one of the strangest, most unforgettable moments in Oscar history. A collision of fame, fury, and forgiveness, all in one night. The fallout from that slap didn't just shake Hollywood, it took over the entire world. For weeks, social media was on fire with nonstop debates about toxic masculinity, performative chivalry, celebrity privilege, and whether comedians should joke about someone's medical condition. Some folks claimed Will was just defending his wife's honor, while others said flat out, violence is never the answer, no matter the reason. But inside the comedy world, there was one clear message. You don't hit comedians for telling jokes, period. Jim Carrey even sounded off on CBS Mornings saying, "You do not have the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words." He didn't stop there. He said if he were Chris Rock, he'd have sued Will Smith for $200 million, pointing out that that video is going to be there forever. Carrey also blasted Hollywood's reaction that night, calling the industry spineless for giving Will a standing ovation right after watching him commit assault on live television. Bill Maher chimed in too, saying alopecia isn't leukemia and that everyone struggles with their hair, a jab at how out of proportion the reaction had become. And Ricky Gervais, never one to stay quiet, threw in his own dark humor saying, "I'm fat and balding, where's my benefits?" The comedy community rallied hard behind Chris. Not just because they liked him, but because they knew what this moment meant for every performer who grabs a mic. If it became okay to attack comedians for jokes, then comedy itself was under threat. Then came the Academy's moves. On April 1st, 2022, Will Smith resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Just 4 days later, the Academy's Board of Governors hit him with a 10-year ban from attending the Oscars or any Academy events. But here's the twist. He's still got to keep his Best Actor trophy. To many, that punishment felt both harsh and hollow, a mix of accountability and privilege that left the world divided once again. Hollywood had its headline, but the debate over respect, restraint, and reputation was just getting started. The Academy's punishment hit hard, but didn't quite satisfy everyone. It was severe because it banned Will Smith from Hollywood's biggest night for an entire decade, yet insufficient because it dodged the bigger question. Shouldn't assault be handled by the law, not just by the industry? Chris Rock had the power to press charges, but he didn't. He could have sat for interviews, cashed in on the media storm, and milked the moment, but he refused. For almost a year, he stayed completely silent, ignoring every interview request and turning down huge offers. That silence spoke louder than any headline. Chris wasn't about to let Will Smith see him crumble or play the victim. He chose dignity over drama. His revenge would come through the one thing he mastered better than anyone else: comedy. But before Chris even got the chance to reclaim the stage, another shocking moment hit the comedy world. And this time, it was Dave Chappelle's turn. The slap era had opened the floodgates, and Chappelle became the next big name caught in the wave of violence against performers. Just 5 weeks after Will Smith's Oscar meltdown, Dave Chappelle was performing at the iconic Hollywood Bowl during Netflix's A Joke Festival, a massive event celebrating stand-up legends. The crowd was electric, thousands of fans packed in, with celebrities like Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes watching from the audience. Then, out of nowhere, chaos struck. A man from the crowd suddenly charged the stage, armed with a replica gun that hid a folding knife blade, and tackled Chappelle right in the middle of his act. The attacker, 23-year-old Isaiah Lee, somehow slipped past security, jumped a barrier, and lunged at one of comedy's most powerful voices in front of thousands of stunned spectators. Security and nearby stars reacted instantly. Jamie Foxx and Busta Rhymes jumped into action alongside guards, helping to pull the man off Chappelle. The scene was wild. Another terrifying reminder that the slap had sparked something dangerous, turning comedy stages into unpredictable battlegrounds. Security rushed in fast, tackling Isaiah Lee, pinning him down, and dragging him off stage before things could get worse. Lee was arrested and slapped with 4 misdemeanor charges, including battery, possession of a weapon with intent to assault, unauthorized access to the stage, and interfering with a live performance. It was wild, a real-life example of how comedy had suddenly turned dangerous. Dave Chappelle thankfully wasn't hurt, just shaken, but true to form, he bounced back fast. Only 2 days later, he popped up at a secret show at LA's legendary Comedy Store, turning trauma into material like only he could. And that night became one for the books, because Chris Rock joined him on stage. Their exchange instantly became comedy history. Chappelle cracked first, looking over at Chris and joking, "At least you got smacked by somebody of repute. I got smacked by a homeless dude with leaves in his hair." The crowd lost it. The laughter was explosive. It was the perfect mix of tension and humor. Then Chris fired back with his own killer line, saying he got smacked by the softest rapper that ever rapped. The room went crazy. That single punchline hit harder than any insult, because it wasn't just about the slap, it was about tearing down Will Smith's tough guy image. By calling him the softest rapper, Chris wasn't saying Will was violent or unstable. He was calling his whole macho act fake. It was a brutal reminder that while Will had hits like Gettin' Jiggy With It and Summertime, he was never seen as a street legend, just a clean-cut star trying to look hard after a meltdown. Chris had even dropped a quick quip right after Chappelle's original attack at the Hollywood Bowl, asking the crowd, "Was that Will Smith?" It was sharp, layered, and hilarious, showing he could acknowledge the madness while still keeping control of the stage. Both men had taken real-life chaos and turned it into gold, proving that comedy, even under attack, refuses to die. By cracking jokes about the Oscar slap while standing beside Chappelle, Chris wasn't just being funny. He was doing what comedians do best, turning pain into punchlines. It showed that even after violence, comics instinctively use humor to take back control of the moment. But behind the laughter, the ripple effect of that night was already spreading through the entire comedy world. Comedy club owners across America started to draw a straight line between Will Smith's slap and the attack on Dave Chappelle. Danny Zoldan, owner of Stand Up New York, explained it perfectly. Before that Oscar night, there was like an invisible fence around comedians. People could boo, heckle, or walk out, but they never crossed that line. Comedians could say almost anything, and nobody dared storm the stage. But after Will Smith stepped up and hit Chris Rock on live TV, that invisible fence got shattered. Zoldan said she knew right then it wouldn't be the last time, that there would be copycats, and that Will Smith had broken the barrier, making it seem like attacking a performer was somehow okay. That invisible fence metaphor hit hard because it summed up something sacred about stand-up, an unspoken deal between performers and audiences. For decades, people understood the rule. You could disagree, you could get offended, but you didn't attack the stage. Will's slap destroyed that silent agreement, showing unstable fans everywhere that it could be done. And that's terrifying for anyone with a mic in hand. Even comedy legends spoke out. Howie Mandel didn't sugarcoat it. He said straight up, "The slap opened the floodgates. Violence triggers violence. This is the beginning of the end for comedy." And while it sounded dramatic, plenty of people agreed. Because if comedians can't take risks, if they have to worry about getting hit for telling jokes, then how can comedy even survive? The art form has always been about vulnerability, risk-taking, and saying the things most people are afraid to say. Without that freedom, the whole culture of stand-up is on the line. The growing fear of on-stage violence hit comedy right at its core, because fear kills freedom, and freedom is what comedy lives on. After the attack, Dave Chappelle's representative released a powerful statement saying his Hollywood Bowl performances were epic and record-breaking, and that Chappelle refused to let one violent moment overshadow the magic of what he created. That defiance meant everything. It was a statement that comedians would not be silenced. Refusing to let fear take over wasn't just about pride, it was about protecting the soul of comedy itself. Violence can't be allowed to win, or else every performer with a microphone becomes a target. Chappelle's response reminded everyone that humor is resistance, that laughter is stronger than fear. But that moment also locked in a troubling new reality. The slap that Will Smith delivered at the Oscars had rewritten the rule book. Suddenly, violence against comedians didn't feel shocking anymore. It felt expected. Some even started treating it like a justified response to offensive jokes, a dangerous mindset that flipped comedy culture upside down. There was no conspiracy here. It was simple cause and effect. Will's slap was seen by billions, and since he faced barely more than a professional slap on the wrist, it sent a message. You can hit a comedian and still get cheered for it. That one night created a ripple that kept spreading, from stages to clubs to arenas, showing unstable people that violence now had an audience. The question hanging over Hollywood was chilling. What would Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle do next? Would they tone it down, play it safe, and step back from edgy material? Would they call for heavier security at every show? Or would they finally confront Will Smith publicly for creating this whole storm? The world didn't have to wait long. Just 4 months after both men were attacked on stage, they joined forces for a joint tour, a defiant move that screamed one thing loud and clear: comedy isn't backing down. Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle hit the road together, launching a powerhouse joint comedy tour that kicked off in Liverpool, England at the M&S Bank Arena on September 1st, 2022. Even though the tour had been planned before either of them got attacked, it quickly became the stage where both legends would finally face the topic the whole world was waiting to hear about: violence against comedians. The Liverpool show set the tone for everything that followed. Chris Rock stepped out first, the crowd roaring, waiting for him to mention the slap. And he did, though not as deep as he would later go in selective outrage. Still, that night you could feel the tension mixed with laughter as he threw his first real punches, verbally this time. Chris took aim at Will Smith's public apology video, the one that had gone viral on YouTube back in July 2022. He called it the hostage video, and that line alone said everything. The crowd exploded. With just those 2 words, Chris made it clear he thought Will's apology wasn't heartfelt. It was damage control. To him, it wasn't an act of remorse. It was a performance, a desperate PR move to clean up Will's image instead of owning up to what really happened. This was the first time Chris had publicly acknowledged the apology, and he made his feelings crystal clear. He wasn't buying it. Then he took things physical, joking that the slap still hurt. He said, "We'll play Ali. I can't even play Floyd Mayweather." The crowd erupted again. That one-liner perfectly captured the absurdity of the whole situation. A smaller comic getting smacked by a man who once trained to play one of the greatest boxers alive. It was classic Chris Rock, sharp, biting, and hilarious. But underneath the laughter, it was also raw truth. He wasn't afraid to talk about the pain, both emotional and physical, but he turned it into comedy gold right in front of the world. Chris didn't hold back. He pointed out how his smaller build made him an easy target. That one simple truth destroyed all those weak narratives claiming he should have fought back or that the slap wasn't a big deal. It reminded everyone that this wasn't some playful scuffle. It was a full-grown man hitting someone who clearly couldn't hit back. Then Chris turned up the heat even more, calling Will Smith Suge Smith. The crowd exploded. It was a ruthless comparison to Suge Knight, the notorious former Death Row Records boss currently serving 28 years for voluntary manslaughter. The nickname hit like a verbal knockout, equating Will, once Hollywood's golden boy, with a convicted violent felon. That line didn't just sting, it flipped Will's entire image upside down, suggesting that what happened at the Oscars wasn't just a mistake, but a glimpse into something darker lurking beneath his polished persona. After Chris wrapped up his set, Dave Chappelle took the stage and dropped his own unforgettable take on the chaos. Standing in that same Liverpool arena, Chappelle told the crowd, "A lot of people forget who Will Smith really is." He pointed out that 10 minutes before Will won his biggest award ever, he suddenly acted like he was back in Philadelphia. It was a sharp reminder of Will's roots, born and raised in West Philly, hinting that for all the glitz and red carpets, a piece of that street instinct never left him. Chappelle's tone wasn't mocking. It was analytical, deep. He was peeling back the layers behind the slap. Then came the line that summed up everything. Chappelle said, "Will did the impression of a perfect person for 30 years, and then he ripped his mask off and showed us he's just as ugly as the rest of us." The crowd went silent for a moment, realizing how raw and real that was. Chappelle finished by saying he hoped Will wouldn't put that mask back on, that he'd finally let the world see who he really was. He even admitted he saw pieces of himself in both men, showing empathy for the broken humanity behind all the fame and fortune. This wasn't about taking sides anymore. It was about exposing the pressure of perfection, the pain behind celebrity images, and the price of pretending to be flawless in a world that loves to watch when you finally crack. For 3 decades, Will Smith had been America's golden boy. The lovable Fresh Prince, the unstoppable box office king, the picture-perfect family man who somehow dodged every Hollywood scandal. But that one slap shattered the illusion, revealing a side filled with rage, pain, and deep unresolved trauma hiding under that polished smile. Dave Chappelle's message that Will shouldn't put his mask back on hit like a mix of compassion and challenge. Compassionate because it gave Will space to be real, to stop pretending and let his true self show. But challenging because it called him out, urging him to face his flaws head on instead of hiding behind image rehab or staged apologies. Chappelle's words went deeper than gossip. When he said he saw himself in both men, he was speaking truth about human nature. He recognized Chris's pain, but he also understood Will's anger, showing that the capacity for violence, frustration, and ego lives in everyone. And fame doesn't erase those flaws. It magnifies them for the whole world to see. That same Liverpool show also gave Chris Rock another viral moment, his cutting observation that Will had slapped him over what he called the nicest joke I ever told. He was talking about the G.I. Jane 2 line, a mild, almost harmless jab that barely even landed when he said it. British outlets quickly picked up the quote, calling it a key piece of Chris's evolving story. And they weren't wrong. That joke became a symbol of how extreme Will's reaction truly was. Because if that lighthearted line, something barely teasing, could trigger that kind of outburst, it wasn't about the joke at all. It was about everything boiling under the surface. In that moment, Chris proved his mastery again, using sharp humor to expose absurdity, turning a slap meant to silence him into the loudest statement of his career. Chris Rock had roasted plenty of stars before, with jokes way harsher than the one that triggered Will Smith, and nobody ever stormed a stage. That's why it was clear the slap wasn't really about the joke at all. It was about Will's own emotional chaos boiling over in public. The joint tour rolled across Europe next, hitting major stops like London's massive O2 Arena and other packed venues across the continent. Chris and Chappelle each performed their own sets, but sometimes they'd riff together on stage, trading jokes about the attacks they'd both endured. Their chemistry was electric, but their message was even stronger. Comedy doesn't back down. Just their shared presence on that tour said it all. Violence might shake comedians, but it won't silence them. Instead of dividing the comedy world, the attacks pulled it tighter together. Performers everywhere started to rally behind them, realizing they were facing the same growing threat. Audiences who thought outrage justified violence. But this tour was bigger than just laughs. It was symbolic. Two of the most powerful black voices in modern comedy, both attacked within weeks of each other, both refusing to crumble. Chris and Chappelle turned their pain into punchlines, using humor as armor, while the rest of the world debated whether jokes now came with consequences. Their courage stood out loud and clear. While critics claimed comedians should watch what they say, these two doubled down, proving that art doesn't survive through fear. It survives through truth and defiance. And yet, that was only the warm-up. Behind the scenes, Chris was working nonstop, shaping the experience of that slap into something bigger, a full-blown Netflix special that would finally let him take full control of his own story. Meanwhile, Chappelle was quietly crafting his own reflections, deep philosophical takes on fame, pain, and the human condition, ideas he'd later share in The Dreamer more than a year later. The European tour wasn't just a comeback, it was a declaration. Comedy might take hits, but it never stays down. The Dreamer gave the world Dave Chappelle's raw, unfiltered take, and he dropped it in style. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2023, Netflix premiered Chappelle's long-awaited special, The Dreamer. Unlike Chris Rock's selective outrage, this one didn't revolve entirely around the slap, but Chappelle still spent a powerful chunk of time reflecting on it, weaving it into a bigger conversation about fame, ego, and friendship. From the jump, Chappelle admitted that watching Will Smith slap Chris Rock live at the Oscars was one of the wildest things he'd ever seen. He told the crowd that at first he thought it had to be staged. Like everyone else, he just couldn't believe something that outrageous could actually happen at the Oscars. His honesty hit home, because that disbelief captured how unreal the moment felt. Violence at an event built around glamour, awards, and fake smiles. It seemed impossible, something straight out of a bad reality show, not real life. But when the reality sank in, it changed the way people saw Hollywood forever. Then Chappelle peeled back the curtain even more, revealing a personal moment that showed how deep his connection to Chris really was. He said that right after the slap, maybe 30 or 40 minutes later, once he figured Chris had made it to another after party, he called him on FaceTime. And here's the kicker. When Chris picked up, he told him, "You're the only person I answered the phone for." That line hit hard. It showed just how shaken Chris really was in that moment, and how much trust and brotherhood existed between two of the biggest names in comedy. Chappelle wasn't just giving commentary. He was sharing what it felt like to witness his friend get humiliated on live TV, and then to comfort him afterward. It wasn't just a pop culture moment to him. It was personal, real, and unforgettable. Chappelle dropped a bombshell in The Dreamer. Apparently, after the slap, even Obama and Oprah tried calling Chris Rock to check in on him. The world's most powerful figures were reaching out, desperate to show support or get a quote, but Chris ignored all of them. He didn't want presidential comfort or celebrity pity. He only picked up for one person, Dave Chappelle. That tiny detail said everything. It showed Chris didn't want sympathy or to be treated like a headline. He wanted to talk to someone who actually got it. Someone who knew what it meant to be attacked while performing, to have your art violated in front of millions. By ignoring the most famous names on the planet and answering for Chappelle, Chris showed that this wasn't about fame. It was about comedy family. Chappelle then shifted the focus to his own Hollywood Bowl attack, connecting it straight back to Will Smith's slap. He joked about it the only way someone who's actually been hit on stage could, with that dark, unshakable humor that comes from living it. He explained that before his attack, he'd spent months teasing Chris about the slap. Fans kept asking him the same thing over and over. What would you have done if Will Smith had slapped you? And Chappelle kept it real. He said even now, he honestly didn't know what he would have done because that kind of situation is so extreme, no one can predict how they'd react until it happens. Then came his coldest and funniest line of the night. Chappelle said he does know one thing Will Smith wouldn't have done, and that's enjoy the rest of his evening. The crowd erupted, and the joke was savage. The implication was crystal clear. If Will had slapped Chappelle instead of Chris Rock, he never would have made it to the after parties, and there definitely wouldn't have been any getting jiggy with it moments later that night. It was classic Chappelle, brutal honesty wrapped in razor-sharp wit. He managed to tie the humor, pain, and absurdity of it all together, proving that no matter how dark the story gets, comedians will always find a way to turn it into a punchline. Chappelle's take in The Dreamer carried a darker edge. Beneath the laughter, there was a quiet sense of threat, a reminder that if the slap had been aimed his way, things would have gone down very differently. Where Chris Rock's response was sharp and analytical, Chappelle's had an undercurrent of raw power, less polished, more primal. He circled back to his earlier take from 2022, doubling down on his belief that Will Smith had been wearing a mask of perfection for 30 years. And that the slap wasn't some random meltdown, it was a reveal. According to Chappelle, what happened at the Oscars wasn't an accident. It was the moment the real Will Smith finally stepped out from behind the Hollywood act. The rage, the dysfunction, the pain, all of it had been hiding under that charming smile, and that night it exploded into the open. This wasn't a hit piece, it was psychological storytelling. Chappelle didn't excuse Will's behavior, but he saw the human being behind the disaster. While Chris dissected the slap as selective outrage, a cowardly act of misplaced anger aimed at a smaller man, Chappelle viewed it as something deeper, a man cracking under the pressure of pretending to be perfect for too long. He framed Will not just as guilty, but as human, flawed, damaged, and real in a way that most celebrities never dare to be. His line from the Liverpool tour came back full circle. He still saw himself in both men. That insight hit differently now. It wasn't just sympathy, it was understanding. He saw Will's rage and humiliation not as isolated sins, but as universal struggles, the same kind of emotional storms that live inside everyone, famous or not. Chappelle's perspective made the whole story more complex. Chris had every reason to be furious. He was the one who got slapped in front of the world. But Chappelle stood outside that personal pain, offering a broader lens. Having lived through his own onstage attack, he could analyze violence from both sides, the performer who gets hit and the man who loses control. It was empathy mixed with realism, comedy laced with philosophy, the perfect balance that made The Dreamer feel less like a stand-up set and more like a mirror held up to fame itself. Chappelle viewed the slap as more than just one man losing control. He saw it as a reflection of something bigger. The whole incident exposed deeper cracks in fame, masculinity, marriage, and the heavy toll of pretending to be perfect for decades. It wasn't just about a single act of violence. It was about what happens when the pressure to appear flawless finally breaks someone in front of the world. When selective outrage and the dreamer dropped, they felt like two sides of the same story. Different energies, same pain. Chris Rock's approach was personal and fiery. His words hit like verbal punches, meant to hold Will accountable by humiliating him in public, just as he had been humiliated on that stage. It was raw, emotional, and unapologetic. Meanwhile, Dave Chappelle's take was slower, deeper, a mix of philosophy and empathy. Instead of condemning Will, he tried to understand him, to figure out why it happened. Chappelle wasn't interested in revenge. He was dissecting the psychology behind the explosion, peeling back layers of fame, frustration, and fractured ego. Together, their specials didn't feel like a coordinated takedown. They felt like a conversation between two wounded artists trying to process the same trauma in their own way. Both were defending comedy itself, reclaiming their art from the chaos of violence and proving that laughter still holds the ultimate power. Everyone wanted to know how they'd handle it. Would they forgive Will, condemn him, pretend it never happened? But they did what true comedians always do. They transformed pain into punchlines, anger into material, and violence into unforgettable art. Millions watched, laughed, and reflected, proof that even in the face of humiliation, humor still wins. The ripple effect of Will's slap, Chappelle's attack, and both men's responses went far beyond personal drama or pop culture gossip. It reignited massive conversations about comedy, violence, accountability, and who gets to decide what's too far to joke about. Comedy club owner Danny Zoldan's invisible fence metaphor captured the shift perfectly. For decades, there had been an unspoken rule protecting comedians on stage. You could heckle, you could walk out, you could disagree, but you never attacked the performer. That fence is gone now, and the comedy world is still trying to rebuild what got broken the night Will Smith stepped onto that Oscar stage. For decades, audiences might have booed, heckled, or even stormed out in protest, but they never crossed that invisible line onto the stage. Then came Will Smith's slap, broadcast live to the entire planet, and the fallout changed everything. The fact that it ended with little more than public embarrassment and a professional slap on the wrist sent a dangerous message. Suddenly, unstable fans everywhere saw permission. If a beloved movie star could walk up and hit a comedian and then get a standing ovation 40 minutes later, what kind of consequences did that leave for regular people? The copycat effect showed up almost immediately. Just 5 weeks after the Oscars, Dave Chappelle was attacked mid-performance at the Hollywood Bowl. And after that, reports started pouring in. Comedians facing hecklers who got way too bold, audience members turning hostile, and clubs realizing that the old sense of safety was gone. The invisible fence that once protected performers had completely vanished. Venues started changing fast, adding barriers, tightening security, and rethinking how close crowds could even get to the stage. For some comics, it felt like performing in a fortress instead of a comedy club. The vibe of live comedy, that intimate connection between the audience and performer, was suddenly under threat. Some people tried to justify it, claiming comedians had gotten away with saying whatever they wanted for too long, that the slap and even future attacks were wake-up calls or justified responses. But that logic misses the whole point, and the whole difference between words and violence. Comedy is about pushing boundaries, sparking emotion, and yes, sometimes offending people, but it's still just words, and words aren't punches. Being offended isn't the same as being injured, and no joke ever justified a slap, a shove, or a stage rush. You can't compare hurt feelings to broken bones, concussions, or trauma from being physically attacked. When people say you can't joke about anything anymore, what they really mean is that fear has started to choke free speech, and that's the real danger. Because once laughter requires permission, comedy stops being comedy at all. A lot of people started saying that Will Smith's slap and Dave Chappelle's attack proved cancel culture had gone from keyboard outrage to real-world violence. And sure, that take was partly true. Both incidents involve people who convinced themselves their anger justified getting physical. But that version of the story missed something huge. Will Smith wasn't some activist trying to cancel Chris Rock over offensive content. He was a husband, furious and humiliated by his wife's very public affair, and he took that pain out on the easiest target in the room. And Chappelle's attacker? He wasn't striking back over any LGBTQ plus jokes or political stance. He was a deeply unstable man with no clear motive who just happened to go after one of the biggest names in comedy. Both moments came from chaos, not cause. And that's what makes them so chilling. Because whether it's fame, frustration, or flat-out mental instability, every performer now knows that one angry person can turn a stage into a battlefield in seconds. So now we want to hear from you. Which comedian's response hit harder for you? Chris Rock's fiery revenge and selective outrage, or Dave Chappelle's cool, thought-provoking reflection in The Dreamer? Do you think violence against comedians has actually been normalized since that Oscar night? Or were these just isolated flashes of madness in a world that's lost its sense of humor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We're diving into this one. And hey, if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Click the next video showing on your screen. Trust me, you'll want to see it.